I'm gonna come over here and let me just make sure I click this. So I don't get echo. Hello, folks. I'm Jerry McKee, and welcome to Prime Time. We have got an exciting guest with us today, and this guest happens to be way on not the east, but the west coast. He's on San Diego. He's San Diego, California, that is, and we're going to talk to him a little bit about his experiences in as being philanthropist, being a vice president, the president of Price Contacts and Smart Tribe Technology. We really want to get into that one right there because I know that he's. Uh, I'm just really that really caught my attention more than anything.
Good.
Also, he is an author of. I've got his book, and I'm going to show you the book here in a few minutes. And he has 40 years experience in RF and MW. Now, I'm pretty sure I think I know what RF means, but I'm going to have to ask him. Uh, RF and now I look at RF. I'm looking at the like a gain of in technology wise, and when sound. Am I true with that?
Yeah. Radio stations are operate on, RF, VHF, UHF radio stations, television stations operate at RF. But when you communicate around the world, you typically do it at microwave frequencies. So when you see the big towers up on the roadside with those big dishes, those is the earlier developments that I did with used aircraft in the 70s.
Oh,
So yeah, that's what that is.
well, we talk about big dishes. Remember when the bigger your dish you had in your yard, the more impressive you are with the neighbors. Finally,
Exactly.
getting off of like when we grew up, we had like what 3 or 4 channels that would work on the TV, and unless you put some, aluminum foil on it, and but this was a new age of this satellite dish that that was bringing in all these channels that we have never seen around the world.
Sure. Well, I had a chance to meet Elon Musk in 1996 and worked with him closely in launching a lot of his satellites. In those days, that big dish you put in your yard was 2,000 to 3,000. Now at Costco, you can get something about the size of a notebook that's $200 that communicates to all of Elon Musk's satellites. And it's a very impressive network.
Wow.
So he's changed electronics in space for us all. So if you get a chance, go by Costco, look at the Starlink
Right.
dish,
Actually,
and you'll probably end up eventually buying it because it's $200. $150 a month gives you full satellite data link speeds of 200 megabits uplink and 60 megabit downlink. So it's a pretty nice system.
yeah. And if everybody doesn't know, this is Tony. Now, Tony, make sure I'm saying your last name, Tony Mauk, right?
Yep, Tony Mock, and it's a pleasure, Jerry. I thank you for taking the time to set this up for me, and I look forward to having this discussion with you.
Well, I tell you what, I'm thrilled to have you. I been having some guests all around the country from the Oak Ridge Boys here recently. The
Oh,
one,
wow, nice.
yeah, Richard Sturban, he was the one that sings the bass in it, and William Golden, he's the one who's got the real long beard, and several other different artists come. T.G. Brown and is coming up, and Ronnie McDowell. I got several coming up too. So you're right there with that
Oh,
artist
wow.
because
Wow, great.
now when uh, you lived in a little was it a little small town, or did you live in Roanoke?
I lived in Roanoke up until 69, and then we moved to Catawba from 69, and then in 75, 77, I moved to Los Angeles.
Okay, now going back when you was living in Roanoke there, running the streets there. Uh,
Yes.
what got your interest in all this electronic technology that when around that time like that, we barely had color TV coming in, and
Exactly.
and what got your interest in this technology?
Well, the stars aligned for my life in that way, in a beautiful way. I bought my parents bought for me in 1967 the Reader's Digest version of the Apollo program. So each month you would get Apollo 1, Apollo 2, up through 11, 12, 13, and so forth. And it would talk about each mission and what the plans were, written by a guy by the name of Dan Golden. And I heard the name Golden, so that piqued up, that past. And when I moved to Los Angeles, just quickly for that, I'm at a table and I'm talking to this guy about space electronics, and his name was Dan Golden.
Wow.
And I looked at him and I was surprised, because how coincidental is that? I mean, if you look at the stars in Los Angeles, 7 million people, and this guy ended up running the Apollo program. And I'm sitting there talking to him. And here is a kid who's been following him since he was 10, who now is 21 years old. And I looked at him, I said, Dan, are you the same guy that wrote the Reader's Digest version of Apollo? And he looked at me and he laughed. And he says, you are the only person that knew that. So we had a great conversation. And a long story short, within about 2-hour lunch, I am now working with him on space programs. So
Wow.
I got invited to all of the programs, all of the satellite programs, all the classified programs, all the space shuttle programs. So that was kind of the kickoff. But before we get to that, we need to talk about the beginning first. And one of the things that we used to do every night on Wednesday, we used to go by your great aunt, my grandmother, Mary Huff McKee.
Mm-hmm.
And we would clean her house. Now, at 6 or 7, I have to tell you, I didn't polish many things, but I certainly washed many dishes. And I watched my mom, I watched my grandmother, and she had 9 kids. And, living in Hardy, 9 kids is a lot of work. And I became, I guess, really appreciative of who she was as a person. She worked pretty much with her hands. She didn't have a lot of money. She made bread from flour. She didn't buy loaves of bread because she saved money by doing that. And what used to happen was something interesting that I think would be alarming for most people, but I don't know if you can hear my sound effects, but that's a knock.
Right.
And every Wednesday night, I would hear a knock at the door, and in the back, I would hear this voice, Mary Huff? Mary Huff? I understand you serve a best cup of coffee in Roanoke. And I said, Grandma, who is this? She says, I don't know. It's probably a hobo, which are homeless people traveling on the railway.
Right.
So she would take a cup of coffee, invite the man or whomever it was in with me. I never felt threatened. But, here's some pretty shady people. But every one of them had a glow and sparkle in their eye and were so thankful that someone cared for them. And I have never seen a person who had nothing shown the attention that my grandmother gave. She didn't turn away from them. She didn't say, oh, my gosh, you smell. She said, you're welcome, and whatever I have is yours. And that stayed with me for the rest of my life. And even today, it influences me.
Back then, when times were more simple, we still had basically the same thing we got now, except for it seemed like people was not as kind and welcoming. My grandmother, Lily McKee, she'd do the same thing. You walk in the door there, first thing she's going to ask you, have you need something to eat,
Right.
And you better eat or you're going to hurt your feelings.
Yeah. I remember Lily well. I love Lily. Yeah, they were a different breed of people. It's kind of interesting how, I think all of these things mold our life depending on how you perceive them. And I perceive them in a very humbling way, in a very gracious way, to have the opportunity to be with my grandmother and to be with my mother in the setting that we had on Elm Avenue. And it was interesting, thinking about that story. It was in Baltimore, Maryland in 1990. I'm in the inner city of the block, which is a heavily prostituted neighborhood. By the way, this is G, no PG stories, no R stories. And I went and picked up $100 and $10 bills from the ATM. And I pulled up to the first stoplight, and there's a woman in December the 24th, 6 p.m., 7 p.m., knocks on my window and says, "Would you like some company?" And I look over at her, and the first thing comes to my mind are two children at home waiting for Christmas. And the first thing that came to mind was I looked at her and I says, "Why are you here?" And she said, "I have a 4-year-old at home." So I believed the story quickly. So I parked the car, got out of the car, walked to the back, and gave her 20. I wish I would have given her 100, but I gave her 20. And she looked at me and she said, "What is this for?" Confused. And I said, "It's for you. It's Christmas." And she said, Are you really?" And I said, "Yeah." So she stepped away, took 2 steps away, and she turned around and looked at me, crying now, a prostitute,
Right.
crying, and said, "Do you know that's the nicest thing anyone has ever done for me in my life?" And I thought that one story really came from my grandmother. And the first thing that came to my mind was that, thank my grandmother, Mary Huff. And that's all I could think of.
Right.
And I said, "God bless you." She walked away, and I feel like, how did someone become 22 or 24 and never have somebody show any care towards them? But yet I grew up in a very poor environment, thinking of my grandmother, but I felt so rich with the love that my family had for each other. We didn't have much, but we shared whatever we had. So I think reflecting back on how our influences drive our life, that to me was a direct response for Mary Huff and the way she was as a person who, in my mind, was just like my mother. Both of them were angels put on this earth.
Right. And that's part of the training that they brought you up, and that's to you was normal to do that. For her, where who knows, her being on the street, how she got that way. It's sometimes we easy to judge people that has unfortunate and things happen, even when they did something bad. You always have, to me, compassion. That's what Christ had, was compassion.
Right.
Now,
Well, you go back to the interest, kind of bouncing around with stories, but kind of still with this theme of being little, my brain was always active. And my neighbor friend, we started into this thing where there was a fire left by the people who cut down trees, who was getting ready to build a house. So now we're talking about 70, 71. And they left a fire burning, like a red glow. No chances of flames. But so my buddy Mike, who his parents always go to Myrtle Beach, and when you go to Myrtle Beach, what do you bring back? Fireworks.
Oh yes.
So he brought firecrackers, and I thought, well, I have CO2 cartridges. Why don't I throw those in there? And then he said, well, that was a pretty good one. Why don't I go get my M80s? So he got his M80s. And he threw his M80s in there. So it starts to get a little bit more exciting. Well, then I thought as a kid, I remember at 4 throwing an empty can of quick paint remover in the fire.
Oh, no.
And we stepped back. The explosion was so loud on Shenandoah Avenue as a dynamite plant. The neighbors all came out and thought the dynamite plant blew up. So being a 12-year-old boy, loaded with hormones and nowhere to put them, right? I said, well, gosh, if an empty can of 5 gallons of quick paint remover would do that, what would a full can do? And I put a full can in there. And I ran as fast as I could. And when I got across the street, I turned around and looked as my mother's coming out the door. And she said, Tony, what did you just do? And what happened, probably 500 yards away, I felt the hands of a person from the pressure from the bomb going off, shoving me backwards. That was the first explosion. The second explosion is when this thing blew out sideways. It looked like hell unleashed on earth. It was black, and in the middle were red lines of something brewing that I had no idea. And as it blew out, probably 200 yards in width, it sucked out all the oxygen out of the air, and a second explosion went straight up, and it looked like an atomic bomb. The neighbors were calling, thinking the Germans were attacking Catawba. And everyone said, "Oh my gosh, Tony, I mean, that was crazy." I said, "Yeah, it was crazy, but I learned an important lesson." And this is for responsible adults out there. When I told the firemen this story, and the firemen all say the same answer, that's why we don't go to a home fire in a garage, but because of all of the chemicals. Those chemicals that can be in a garage, like quick paint remover, is very, very deadly. And that was probably the most eye-opening experience for me that changed my life.
Oh, I
Because
bet.
at that point, I knew how fragile life was and can be, and I need to stay away from my exploration and explosives.
Well, that's and the way you talk about that, I was telling you a story earlier about when I was like 10, 11, 12 years old. Well, I was probably 10, maybe like that. That we all played down in the railroad tracks, and that's when I seen this boxcar was open. Well, curious as I am, I went inside and I seen this big box and looked like Roman candles. And I said, "Wow, I hit the jackpot." So I got a bunch of them, gave them, passed around to my friends. They put them all there, and a little later on, next day, detective and police come knocking on the door, and they said, "Son, we want to talk to you a little bit." I said, "Did you get something out of a railroad card?" I says, I was hesitating. He says, "Now come on." He says, "You ain't in trouble." I said, "Yes." He says, "Where did you put them?" I said, "Well, I gave them to this kid and this kid here." And they said, "Oh my goodness." He said, "Where's yours?" Well, I had mine underneath the house next to the furnace. And
Oh,
yes, and come find out it was dynamite. And
oh,
we could have blew up that whole town, all of us kids and stuff, and us too. And they went around, they got every one of them. And my mom and him asked him, says, "Was he going to get in trouble?" He says, "Uh-uh." He says, "The man that left that car right there, he's in trouble."
yes, exactly.
But now, how did you get involved when you was going to school? The wiring and the engineering part of uh, with these satellites and did something like that fancy when you're going to school that you just something like the electronic part of it that you really loved?
Another blessing. It was very interesting. I got a job at Hughes Aircraft. Was going to UCLA, and it was interesting. I was assigned to work for a PhD, and most engineer relationships were just like that. But what had happened with this engineer, he had polio as a child, and he walked with a limp. And it turned out this gentleman by the name of Al Rotberg worked and played a band with Carmen Miranda and Benny Goodman in the
Ah,
40s. Very interesting fellow. And during lunch, he would play his desk as though it was a drum setting on the set of a Carmen Miranda show. And can you imagine how entertained I was at 21, 22 years old? So I introduced him to a lot of people at Hughes, and he told me, he says, "Tony, I'm really disappointed that the company didn't acknowledge me because they normally send a company newsletter, talk about Al Rotberg, the PhD, and so forth." And he said, they didn't do that. So he said, "You stick with me," and excuse the slang term. He said, "but if you stick with me, you'll be farting through silk." Normally, that story is stick with me, you'll be wearing silk. But Al's color, of course, he changed it. And he said, "Tony," he says, "I've got a problem. I'm blind." I went, "What?" He says, "I'm blind." I said, "You're kidding." He says, "I can't see. Will you be my eyes on all of my projects?"
wow.
And I went, "I don't know if I can do that." He said, Tony, I know you. I've watched you. You have the competency to do anything that you set your mind to. And he says, because of that reason, I'm giving you all my projects. So this would have been a job that would have been handed to a 50, 60-year-old that's been working in the business for 30 years. I had been working in the business 2 years, and I just befriended the right guy.
Wow.
And it turns out that what this whole project was is when we had cable television for the U.S. and the world, Hughes Aircraft's assignment was to change the satellites, the uplinks, the downlinks, and all of the crosslinks to make everything become 44 channels. So that was my job. And I went to the division manager. Now I have, executive attention at Hughes Aircraft, a $4 billion company. And he said, can you build me these parts by Monday morning? This is Thursday afternoon. And I told Abe Sonnenschein, I said, if you give me an unlimited banking account, meaning a signed blank check, I'll do it. And he says, Tony, that would be cheap. If you can get it done by Monday, you'll save me a lot of money. So it was kind of a fun project because here in Los Angeles, I call these equipment manufacturers and I say, can you deliver me prototype boards tomorrow? And they start laughing. And I said, now that you've done laughing, do me a favor and listen to me very carefully. I'm at Hughes Aircraft. We have an unlimited budget. I don't care what it costs. He said, can you say that one more time? I said, if you can get it to me by tomorrow, I don't care what you charge me. Can you imagine a negotiation like that?
Oh, really?
As a kid engineer? So then we had the Phalanx missile product line, and I had 10 of those people come in on Saturday to start building the parts. And we had all the parts tested and delivered to the division manager Monday morning. And he looked at me and says, oh my gosh, I can't believe you did this. So that really kind of kick-started me in the industry because of those reports, and those results really had never been done because cable television really kind of came from the 30s and 40s.
Right.
And it was just starting. And then when we put it on a satellite with 44 channels, our first customer, our first order was home box office. We got a $100 million order. And so that effort on that weekend got us that award. And my general manager at that time was very excited we were able to do that. So it was a young kid that didn't know better, me, a PhD that had faith in me, and a lot of prayers at night to get to the point to get that kind of confidence to be able to do such a thing. So that's kind of where it all started in a very interesting way. And as a result of that, all of the people on the Apollo program that you've read about were there people that I was working with in Los Angeles. And we would tell stories about Werner von Braun at Huntsville, Alabama, who really was the guy who was the V-2 rocket engineer from Germany. I never met him, but I met all the people that worked with him. And they were telling me that Werner von Braun wasn't even allowed to go into Huntsville Arsenal. They kept him in a trailer, which I thought, oh my God, the most brilliant man in the world is now kept in a trailer. But it was fun to hear these stories. They also were at Houston. They'd have a launch party before any of the Saturn rockets, the Apollo program, the Mercury program. And they said they could always tell the astronauts because every one of them came through the Houston door in a brand new Corvette.
Wow.
So I got to relive the 60s and 70s with a lot of the people that were still, alive and kicking. Alan Shepard, John Glenn, got to meet and work with, a lot of these people, which, oh my gosh, can you imagine?
Yeah, I mean, you got to work with John Glenn, and you got to meet a lot of the astronauts.
Yeah. They were a breed amongst themselves because if you're a flight test pilot with the Air Force, you don't worry about anything. It just doesn't exist. Yeah, I may die. Aren't you worried you're going to die? Doesn't exist. They're going to go in that thing. They're going to fly it at Mach 9, and they
Hmm.
don't care.
Wow. Now you did some with test a gravity test. I read
We
something.
were doing that. The anti-gravity was more done with brilliant pebbles for Ronald Reagan when he generated the Star Wars program.
Uh-huh.
We did built a coffee can that was called Brilliant Pebbles. So in the missile launched into space, if you wanted to take out, and it was actually put into place, a intercontinental ballistic missile comes over from Russia, and in space we will intercept it with these anti-gravity bullets. They would center themselves once they've launched out of the pod, and then they would fire from a 0 to 2,000 mile an hour or 2,000 miles almost per second, would accelerate to knock all the incoming intercontinental ballistic missiles out of space.
Wow.
So yeah, there was, it was interesting too, Jerry, going back to your full-time job as a pastor of the church. One of the things is that everyone has always been in this environment. I think the people that get this close to creation, they find themselves in a place where proof is everywhere that God exists. You look at how balanced Earth, the moon, and all the planets circling around a hydrogen furnace. I mean, who built a hydrogen furnace? Well, God
Mhm.
did 15 billion years ago. And we would be working on programs like a Copperhead missile. Copperhead missile had an infrared sensor in it. And you look at a bat has sonar. And I said, isn't it kind of funny that we're struggling to meet some of these requirements? And God already did it 20 million years ago. So if he was that far ahead 20 million years ago, where is he today? And I
Oh.
think the caption of my career is Webb Space Telescope. That was the most, first of all, everything else that I've worked on, nobody can know about it. It was just that's where the government spent all of its money in classified satellites. Each
Right.
classified satellite is $4 billion. You've heard rumors that they can read license plates from space. Okay. But they do more than that, right? And
Hmm.
those things we were never able to talk about, to take the same team and put them together on Webb Space Telescope. We did in 1995, 96, we got our kickoff patches for Webb Space Telescope, and we came up with the architecture, laid it out, and said, okay, this exists. We can use solar panels, we can use the batteries, but a sensor that can detect a light bulb on Jupiter doesn't exist. We'll have to make one. So it was fun for me to look at what technology doesn't exist and how do you create it? Because you get back to the same thing. If you have a government budget, it's unlimited, especially in the task to achieve an already congressionally funded line item. Now, unfortunately, the first budget cut was 4 billion, and I think by the time it was launched, it's 6 billion. But you see the pictures that are coming back. Is nothing else better on this planet to really illustrate God's world,
Oh yes.
God's universe, and how vast and how incredible it really is. So when I get into those conversations with people, it's a beautiful thing because how did it become so that we have a perfect planet situated the perfect distance from the sun with a perfect moon balancing out our tides? That didn't happen by accident. That
Oh,
was engineered.
exactly. A friend of mine, I told him that I was going to be talking to you and told him a little bit about you and all. He says, "How about asking him this?" Says, "Ask him if he's ever seen any UFOs."
I've created a couple. Those brilliant pebbles when we launched them out at actually we had them at Tonopah. So Tonopah's area, Groom Lake, Area 51, and it basically is the same thing as Nellis, that's used for training for Air Force tactical fighters. The difference between Tonopah and Edwards, for instance, is that whatever you're doing at Tonopah, nobody will hear about it for 10 years. But if you do something at Tonopah that it turned out we had the Brilliant Pebbles coffee cans out in the field, and when you ignite them, they almost explode because they're breaking sound barriers. They're doing all kinds of crazy things, and they have this blue glow around them. So when you see them hovering above the ground 8 to 9 feet, and when you hit the thruster, it shoots out, and it's now going 7,000 miles an hour. One guy in the mountains, when they were looking through them in binoculars, recorded a 7 on the Richter scale, thinking it was like, oh my gosh, this is an earthquake. So they knew those little brilliant pebbles that were moving around were UFOs. So I can tell you, I've seen a lot of things that are close to UFOs. If you look at the technology that was developed for SR-71 in 1950s, I mean, that's a 1950 aircraft that went 2,700 miles an hour, that flew beyond 70,000. It flew to 120,000. And we were just building airplanes that's starting to fly, at 300, 400 miles an hour. That technology came from somewhere. I have no idea where. Kelly, the designer, the project manager at Lockheed, he was smart, but I don't think he was that smart. So I have to think something has been hinted around UFOs somewhere left behind in all this technology. I didn't have access to that. If I did, I'm not sure. I probably couldn't tell you, but I didn't have access to that.
Now, living out in San Diego, when you first went out there, was it kind of a culture shock? I mean,
Oh my gosh, Jerry. Oh, I'm laying in bed July the 4th, 1975. The next day, my grandmother and I are driving to California, and I'm listening to tree frogs. My earplug keeps popping out. And I'm listening to tree frogs. And the next morning in Los Angeles, I hear horns blowing at 4:30, 5 o'clock, 6, 6:30. I hear engines scraping, people yelling. It's like, oh my gosh, where did I end up? So that was my culture shock. It was exciting. There were many times in the first 12 months I was ready to move back. I missed a lot of family birthdays. I missed a lot of family time. Would I do it differently? I don't know, because I experienced something in life that I asked for as a child. I wanted to work on space programs, and God granted me that wish. And I could not ask for anything. I mean, everything that was laid out of all the people that I met with and got to really enjoy how they thought and how they designed and worked with them as a team, of even looking at Webb Space Telescope. That was a monumental task, a huge task of many people. And in order to deal with moving from the tree frogs to the horns, beeping horns, grinding engines, slamming on brakes, and a lot of people, a lot of crime, for me today, I would say it was worth the effort, because I accomplished something in my life that I feel great about, not good about, great about. And I was able to still maintain a relationship with my family and friends, even though 2,600 miles existed between the two of us.
Right. Well, it sounds like you had, you haven't retired yet, have you?
I did, kind of, but I've got the Native American company that I started.
That's what I was going to ask you about, yes.
Well, one of the things happened. This is a story that requires kind of framing of what took place. So when I was at Hughes 45 years ago, I met a lot of Native American people. And they told me, they said, hey, Tony, we'd love to have you come to New Mexico. That went on for 40 years. And 7 years ago, I went to New Mexico, and saw what was called the Buffalo Dance.
Oh,
And
okay.
they are amazing people. And they have let me into almost every aspect of their life in a way that I would have never suspected this white boy would have been into that place. But I feel grateful. I admire them all and very supportive. But one of the girls came up to me that was 6 years old, and she handed me a cup of hot chocolate. It was cold, by the way, but the gesture won my heart immediately.
Right.
So it was January the 6th, and I asked her, I said, "What did you get for Christmas?" She said, "Well, I wanted a bicycle, but Santa couldn't afford it this year."
Uh,
So I'm going out the door. Josie's grabbing my arm. She says, "Tony," she knows me. She says, "Don't you do it. If you buy one bicycle, you're going to have 30 other children upset that they didn't get a bicycle." So I thought about that and I went, okay. So the next year, I ordered a truckload of 40 bicycles to have them delivered to Native American kids. That was like, okay, I'm ready to do this. And COVID hit. So there were no vehicles allowed on the reservation during COVID.
uh,
So the third year, now 2 years ago, I told Josie, I said, why don't we start a business that helps Native Americans become educated and trained to earn more money? And basically, many of them, not all, but many of them are very poor.
right.
Their land leases, when people say, oh, government's giving them money, no, no, no. The government is giving them no money. Government is paying them for their land leases. So when they go up in Montana, Wyoming, Forsyth, Montana, which is where all the B-2 does its bombing runs,
Mm-hmm.
they do those bombing runs over native reservations. And every year they negotiate those contracts and they set up some arbitrary value to fly airplanes over their land. And so that's the mechanics. I looked at a business model that might be able to work for the natives, and I looked at the casino model. The casino never has really helped the natives. Harris, MGM, all of the casino giants get tons of money from that.
Right.
But they get the money, not the natives. The natives were promised jobs, but the jobs they promised were janitorial jobs, maintenance jobs that are making $6 to $7 an hour.
Oh, wow.
The natives are very insulted by that. So in a nutshell, they won my heart. One of the natives adopted me as a native and called me White Eyes. And I got to meet with the 19 Pueblos, and they're all long black hair, dark skin. And I sat down at the table with them all. And as I sat down, I said, hey, I just wanted to let you know I'm not a Native American. Oh my gosh, they thought that was the funniest thing. Here's a white guy with white hair telling them that I'm not a native, right? But they appreciated it. I said, but I do have an interesting name that I want to share with you. One of the Pueblos named me White Eyes. Being that my last name is Mauk and I'm a son, my Native American name is White Eyes Moccasin. Oh my God. They loved it. They thought that was the funniest thing they've ever heard. And that's how we started our relationship. So from that, I've been offered and invited to most of the reservations. Some live in the mountains. Some have homes that have been there for 5,000 years.
Wow.
And when you live this way and talk this way, I mean, one night for a fireplace setting, I'm out with the natives, we're talking, and they're talking about their ancestors watching the Spaniards, 1600s, Spaniards coming through the fields with their bright, polished, brass-plated vests,
Mm-hmm.
and they could see them for miles away. So, you know, to me, having a 500-year-old conversation like it happened yesterday is quite amazing.
Well, that's priceless right there. That's
So
that's better than history books, because history books can get
there
corrected.
is no history on it,
Right.
right? Right.
Right.
And so I tr- would you like to hear a little bit about the buffalo dance?
Sure. Love to
Do you
hear.
have time?
Yes, we have time.
Okay. So the buffalo dance is something that I've learned and been involved, is that when you hunt a buffalo, in each one of the dances and festive activities is a hunt or feast. They respect the buffalo, its spirit, its life, as God has given it life, has given you life.
Mm-hmm.
And as the creator is getting ready to relinquish that life to you, you thank the creator for that blessing. So that's the purpose. Then I tried to figure out, when you watched all the Westerns, and I've watched them and you've watched them,
Mm-hmm.
what are they saying when they're dancing around, right? Right? What is it they're saying? And I have it. I actually have it wrote up. If you'd like to have it, I'd be happy to give you a copy. I have had it verified by them, and they look at me because they don't document. I have to document everything. So what they basically start their prayer off with: we come to you, great creator, creator of the universe. That's the first beginning of the drums, and the dancing. We pray to you for water and rain to grow our harvest, to give us food, and we all can prosper as a family, as people. You think about what they just said. It's not me, it's not you, it's all of us together. So they start at 5 o'clock in the morning, and they go to the mountain, and they come down from prayer, and they go into the cacique's house. The cacique is actually, in 200 years ago, was a chief.
Right.
Now he's called a cacique. Cacique is a spiritual leader of grand value, a chief.
Mm-hmm.
That's a Spanish term for cacique. They get blessed by him, and they're given corn, handful of corn. And that handful of corn with the 250 dancers then is handed out to all of the people that are participating in the plaza. That's for you to take the corn home and grow your own harvest.
Wow.
And if you think about that balance, I sit back and think, when we called them savages, we had no idea who these people were. We didn't take the time to learn, how did people for 5,000 years live together and not damage the environment? How do you do that? I don't know. They did it, right? Maybe if we moved to Hardy and lived like they did in the 30s, we'd probably be the same way. But I have to say that when I find out these pieces, it breaks my heart in many ways, but then I have to respect them for who they are really as people. Mm-hmm. And then after the ceremony of the day, because the dance lasts from 5 in the morning to 5 at night. So these children are dancing for 12 hours. It's 10 degrees, goodness. And they're wearing a long cloth, no pants, no top, with something covering their shoulders. They've never heard the story, don't go out and get cold, you'll catch a cold. They don't get sick. So I learned something in that. It's like, wait a minute, maybe I don't need this big coat, right? I've got 2 layers of thermal underwear, a coat, jacket, and another coat and a hat. And I'm still freezing, but they're doing fine.
But if you think about,
so at the end of the evening,
if you think about it,
I'm sorry,
going out into the cold, if you go to like the operating rooms, how cold it is, it kills the germs.
Yes.
So really, you go out.
It does.
How you gonna catch a cold? It's already cold enough the germs can't get on you.
That's right. Well, that's one of the things with aspirin, by the way. Aspirin reduces the fever, which prolongs the illness.
Didn't think about that.
So if you are able to handle the 104 degrees, you will thermally kill off a lot of the germs. But aspirin in the bad sense, will prolong a lot of illness, which is kind of interesting. But they're fascinating people. I have
Huh.
to say, the more I'm engaged with them, the more I'm involved with them, the more trust we have, and the more open they become. They're in a different. They're in their own world. I mean, this is the United States, but they have their own United States within United States. They have their own laws. They have their own treaties. They have their own makeup, and it's a beautiful culture.
Yeah.
It really is. I haven't really seen anything that I step back going, oh, I don't know about that. I just step back and go, wow, what they built as a people, I would hate for them to lose. So the goal of Smart Tribe is to develop Native education baseline, improve it, certify them, and giving them an ability to get these jobs while still living on the reservation. Because if you heard the story earlier about me working at Hughes and meeting all the natives,
Right.
they had to leave their tribe. So what the goal is to have the tribes move back home, obtain the lifestyle and the respect that they deserve, and still be able to maintain and earn a living. So that's the whole scope of Smart Tribe, and so far it's going well. We've got a lot of support. I've got now we have Deb Holland. She is the assistant director of interior. She's the director of interior reporting to Biden. We have the governor of New Mexico. Two state senators said, Tony, when you're ready, we're all behind you. We don't normally get involved with these kind of projects, but what you're doing, we feel compassionate about. We will help you. So they did set aside $480 billion for Native American Indians. But what I'm finding, they don't know what to do with it.
Wow. Well, that's great because I've been seeing some of your pictures that you've had of the Native American, and I'll tell you what, their outfits that they use for the ceremonial outfits that you had pictures of is beautiful. It's art.
Yeah, yes, it is. Their creativity with their hands, their skill sets is should never be lost because it truly is a beautiful part of, I think, everybody's history, really. But yeah, I appreciate you noticing that because you're absolutely right. It's their craftsmanship and their leather work. They're the only one that can own an eagle feather. Native Americans can own an eagle feather because everybody else is illegal to own.
Right.
So they have these beautiful eagle feather headpieces. There's one with a beaver pelt that looks like a buffalo that just shines and glistens and light. Turkey feathers that I don't know how they do these things, but it's impressive.
Oh man, yeah. I just it just blew me away just looking at some of the uh, things, even in your writings, and actually, speaking of your writings too, you got author of the book of Gateways,
I
and
did. Thank you.
actually, I have that book right here, and this book can be ordered on Amazon. It's got a lot of your poetry in here and a lot of pictures. Uh, Now, I was reading a lot of this, the poetry with the pictures. It's almost like the pictures goes with the poetry that you wrote.
Exactly.
Is like you stand there seeing something that caught your interest, and uh, when you write in poetry, I mean, does it just because I've took some English lessons in poetry, and when they first started bringing it to me at the college, I was thinking, oh my goodness, I got to learn poetry. But and during the way she taught it, it was beautiful. And think about it, your songs that we listen to is poetry. And now
And right, it is.
how did you
It's almost like it's really interesting. Answering that question takes an emotion and a feeling that overcomes me, not hits me, but overpowers me in many ways. if you read, and probably the best one to use an example that take time later, look at the back cover of that book. If you could look at it now for me, can you pick your book up
Yes.
and look at the back cover, flip it over, and see the picture at the bottom?
Yes.
That's the gateway. That's the gate into Smart Tribe. If you look at how old that gate is probably 200 years old.
Wow.
That is the gate into Smart Tribe, and that is our building. But now that gate has a different memory, because where the story of the gateway came from is anytime you walk through a gate, you're going through a gateway of new experiences, new people, new life, some good and some bad. But whatever it is, don't not walk through that gate. Walk through that gate with honor and respect and goodwill, and things will come good of that. And that's really the back cover. And that's the start of all of these stories that really are more so interconnected by my personal experiences. The fog story, the lighthouse foghorn, that was my backyard, right? At night, as I'm laying in, as the fog is rolling in, you could hear the foghorn, right? And the other one, there's a lot of personal stories of heartbreak, love, losses.
Right.
And I wanted to try to capture as much of that as I could. So thank you for buying my book. The profits do go to Girl Powers out of Richmond, Virginia. It's a nonprofit that helps young ladies to get into college. So that drove me as much as the book itself. So those two projects together, it took me about 6 months to finish it, but I'm glad I did. And it's been very rewarding. And again, thank you for taking the time to buy it. And let me know what you think once you read through it.
Yeah, I've read through and looking at the pictures, because I'm more of I'm a graphics person. That's what I used to do for another company.
Sure.
Did all the graphics, and I love taking pictures. But what I don't like taking pictures of, if you see I'm on my Facebook, you might see a tin can that to me just looked beautiful laying there in the grass that was real green around it, and it's just laying there, and just something about that I took a picture of.
Right.
A telephone pole with the unique lines coming across that wrapped around it. Something about it just looked great. And an old '66 rusted out car, weeds all around it. It was just something about that, like that has stopped in time, but things around it still continue on. And well,
That's
yeah,
great. I appreciate you sharing that.
but it's in our artwork now. Did I say something on some of your pictures that um, kung fu
Yes.
and did you? Did,
Another amazing group of coincidences, almost identical to the story of Dan Golden and NASA and working on space project. In Virginia, I painted a picture of Bruce Lee,
right.
and it turns out John Huff worked out with Chuck Norris. Bruce Lee's post deliverer was a friend. And so through them, Chuck Norris and Bruce Lee, Linda Lee was coming back from Hong Kong for the year of June to July of 1975. I knew what airplane Linda Lee was getting on, which was kind of funny, right? Chuck Norris and Linda Lee both were neighbors. Chuck Norris lived at, and I'm giving this out to the public because they're not there any longer, but Chuck lived at 7 Empty Saddle, and Bruce Lee lived at 7 Lariat, and they were 1 block from each other. So I was at Chuck's house when Orion Pictures pulled up in the limousines to get him to sign up the contract, Good Guys Wear Black, and the first big pictures that got Chuck going. And then I got to deliver this painting to Linda Lee, and I got to meet, coming out the door, was Grace Lee, which was Bruce Lee's mother. Brandon Lee, a little kid, he was probably about 4 at the time. No, he wasn't. He was 7 at the time. And Shannon, the daughter, she was 4 at the time. So I got to meet them, right?
Oh, wow.
And that was really cool. But then I became friends with Brandon. And Brandon's 16th birthday, Linda gave him a red 1957 T-Bird. And he looked at me, and I told him, I said, I don't know if you remember me, but my name's Tony Mauk. He goes, I know you. I said, I don't remember how. But, oh, gosh, he says, you did the painting of my dad that's been in my house ever since I was little. So when that painting went in the house, it went to a prime spot. And I'm like thinking, oh, my God, how wonderful is that, right?
Really?
And so through that, it's an interesting thing of confidence, because me going to my hero's wife's house and seeing Bruce Lee stuff that was like a motivator of me in martial arts as a kid.
Right.
And I'm now seeing all of these bags and all of these photographs. So it was a very, engaging meeting of at that time, 17 years old, 1975, was amazing. So I come back, and in 1977, I started at UCLA, and I sat down as a Jungian class at UCLA, and here is Tom Laughlin teaching the class, Billy Jack. And behind me is his wife, right? And she's in all the movies too. She's behind me.
Right.
She just accompanied him. She helped him. She organized him, many things like that. So I became friends with them, and they invited me to their house, and I got to know Tom McLaughlin, or Billy Jack,
Really?
in a way that I don't think too many people can say they did, because who I got to meet was the guy that in the acting part talked about Native Americans, but he loved Native Americans. As he portrayed in the movie,
Right.
he portrayed in life, because in the back, he had a house near Bel Air, but he had a 10,000 square foot guest house. And it's 2-story. Top story was a movie theater, was a showing room for all of his movies and executive producers, because it was kind of a meeting room. But the first floor was an Indian school for children.
Oh,
So he would
wow.
bring children into his home and teach them. So, the guy was everything he appeared to be. Legitimate, very strong, but a very wonderful person. And then I got to meet Han, which was the guy who did the fighting sequences in Billy Jack. So and then met the cousins, and it was like a big family event from that point. But since then, I have to say, Chuck Norris's family produced 45 years of, I would have to say, very loving friends that were all because of John Wayne Huff, and rest in peace. He opened the doors to all of these beautiful, wonderful people. I still stay in touch with them, and I have to say that they have become family. So it's funny to think of these people. They were probably 7 out of 9 world champions under Chuck Norris, because during that time he was, teaching and had the schools. He produced 7 world champions. And I'm in touch with most of them. The ones that are still alive, I still stay in touch with.
Yeah, I just watched actually Chuck Norris movie, Texas Walker, of course. Watched that
Sure.
the other day, the other night actually, and Billy Jack. Who can't forget that? I mean, that's just and the music in his movie was just
110 Soldier.
yes. That was just. I mean, that would get you all pumped up. So,
Yeah.
well, I tell you what.
It's funny if you look at that one, the whole thing about 110 Soldier, fighting this army, and they're fighting for this rock, and they turned over the rock, and the secret or the treasure was on the bottom, peace on earth.
Yeah.
Is that not a treasure? But you think about the clash of the destruction to get to that one simple message truly is beautiful. And I have to say that itself kind of summarized Tom Laughlin.
Yes, I tell you what, some great movies. Well, Tony, our hour's pretty well up, and I really appreciate you being on here. It's very interesting. You had me captured
Sure.
with it. I mean, just some of the stories you have there, and I know that's just only a fraction of them, but I really appreciate you bringing those to us. Hold on just a second. Let me sign off of this right here, and
Okay.
I'll be back with
Thank
you.
you, Jerry.
I'll be back with you. Okay, you've heard some wonderful, wonderful things about Tony Mauk, and don't forget you can buy his book Gateways on Amazon, and there's some other avenues there too. But always go to Amazon. And thank you for watching, Jerry McKee. And primetime next week is going to be Miss Kitchens, who is running for clerk of court. She's going to get on and wants to talk a little bit about her, some of her things that she wants to do for the clerk of courts of Union County. And tomorrow, don't forget, we got a special prime time coming up with you that's going to be at Buffalo Fire Department. And with Buffalo Fire Department, we're going to talk about fire prevention since all these holidays are coming up. Well, I'm Jerry McKee, and you have a great, great day. And we're out of here.